Hello. It's just that you were louder than I was. That's why. Rabbi Nico briefly mentioned this during the service. Judy and I are connected with Hadar through Shir Hadash, a Hadar Institute in New York, a magnificent institute. And they love us because we send so many people to them, and we have a deal with them to study through Shir Hadash. And they gave us free booklets that are sample lessons from 5 different courses that have to do with Shavuot. And it's just a little treat for us at Shir Hadash because they love us and we love them. And here's Judy to tell you one more thing.
So we have a very special partnership, which means that we can organize groups of study for any course, really, that Zug is offering. And we have a special place where you could take a look at all those courses. And in particular, right now, through the summer, there are a number of folks that are studying one of the courses that is sampled in this booklet. It's the course called Judaism is About Love with Rabbi Shai Held. So what we're offering here at Shir Hadash are 2 different times you might meet up with folks. Either Thursday is Project Zug Day. So Thursdays either in the afternoon at 2 p.m. or at 7 p.m. And a number of us are gathering to study, and you don't necessarily have to come always on Thursday at 2. You could switch it up. Although my understanding is that one class, the Thursday 2 o'clock, is every other week. The 7 p.m. is every week. However, and you could, I don't think those are on Zoom, but one more thing to say is that if you want to study with one other person and just do it asynchronously, you may also do that, and Julie would be more than happy to set you up with a partner from the Havruta group that's forming to study this course and others. So if you have questions and want to learn more, please contact Julie Ogawa via the temple website, and thanks so much. They're all in the back of the room.
Shalom Chaverim. 400, 500 years ago in Tzfat, there was a custom to stay up all night. And on Shavuot, it was not popular. The Magid did it, and it wasn't really a thing, except unless you were particularly holy and maybe looked at askance by other holy people, but it was a thing for a few. And a curious thing happened in Tzfat, an explosion of mysticism, which was related to the expulsion of Jews from Spain, which was related to the mysticism that had been from Spain and Provence, and was related to probably the burgeoning coffee trade hitting Tzfat. And out of this synthesis, there is coffee, I believe, somewhere. I recommend it. If not, I'll go put some on. Out of this explosion came Tikkun Leil practices and societies, right? We have the sort of midnight ritual and the early morning ritual with the Ari documents as Tikkun Rachel and Tikkun Leah. But on Shavuot especially, right, we live in the legacy of that. And Shavuot especially, it became the practice to stay up all night learning. And I think we're so honored and so privileged that we have such scholarship that has come to Shir Hadash. And with that, I guess all I can say is how fortunate I am and how privileged I feel to introduce to you my friend, Professor Graizbord from University of Arizona, who is here to teach us a bit about the medieval, the Judaism of Spain, the hidden Jews of Spain. And so with that, with no further ado.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Michael, for inviting me. I thought you were going to say, we're lucky tonight because we have a guy who, if you don't make him shut up, he'll have you awake all night, yeah? Or he'll try to keep you awake all night. Anyway, again, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rabbi Nico and Congregation Shir Hadash. I feel very comfortable here, and I think you have a wonderful, really a wonderful congregation. What I've been able to experience has been very good. Let me start by saying something that I tell my students, because ultimately, a number of them, not all of them to be sure, go to college thinking, okay, this is what I got to do. Why do I got to do it? Because I got to get a job. And so pretty soon I notice, okay, nobody set these students down to tell them, okay, this is what we do here. This is what it's about. This is what, let's say, political scientists do. This is what sociologists do. This is what historians do. This is what mathematicians do, et cetera, et cetera. So I try to explain, so why are you here in this course? Why'd you end up with this weirdo Graizbord? Okay, so what I say is that in Judaic studies, essentially, we're not so much interested, at least I'm not so interested, in having people remember factoids. Like the Jews in 1475 had so many, okay, fine. For that, I know it's strange to hear a historian say so, but for that there are reference books. I've written some of them, but I don't remember the factoids. I just put them there, so you can go and check it out. History writing is about explaining why history occurred a certain way, not in other ways. In other words, it's part of our meaning-generating, reflex. As very advanced apes, we have this tendency to make, or to try to make sense of things. In particular, what people in Judaic studies do, as far as I've been able to tell, is study culture. Jewish culture in particular, but in fact, what we're imparting in the classroom is understanding, or at least tools for understanding all culture, particularly how culture is built, how it can collapse under the stress of various factors, various external and internal factors, how it can be rebuilt, and what are some continuities and discontinuities between the way that culture was, culture is, and culture will be, right? Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch. So this is, by the way, this is an encapsulation of the historical sense that Jews have, right? As things change through time, and some things stay the same. At any rate, so I have been asked to talk about Sephardim, Kabbalah, and the hidden Jews of Spain. As some of you know, Kristen, right? Is it? Is she here? Oh, there you are. Came up with a wonderful title for my first talk. I don't know what the official title is for this one, but let's just start by saying that these are some of the main topics that I will address. Because my last talk really went for too long, I think I'm going to return to my habit, which is to ask you to keep your questions until the end so that we can go forward. Now, let me try to build a bridge not only between my talk this morning and this afternoon, and the service and the words of Torah that you just heard, and say the following: historical experience has given Jews a first row seat in the horrible and wonderful spectacle whereby we create our culture, we recreate our culture, and it's constantly being torn down, right? Either, again, by us or by people outside. Be that as it may, this is one example, the subject, the Sephardim, Kabbalah, and the quote-unquote hidden Jews of Spain. This is one case in which we can, either enjoy or at least, value our front row seat. So let's start. Okay. Jewish memory is distinct from Jewish history. Jewish history consists of things like, where did I park my car yesterday? That's a fact. That's a historical fact. I parked it on the third level of the Phoenix airport so that I could fly here, etc. Okay, not all of that is important. In fact, I will forget it, right? And so will you forget many factoids in your history. Memory is something quite distinct. Memory consists of events, right, that we choose to remember and ways that we choose to remember them. There is something that we can identify as you might say, traditional Jewish memory. That is to say, the events or the narratives of events that somehow we have enshrined in our collective thinking. They include such events as the parting of the Red Sea, the existence of a dude called Moses, who was saved from certain death by being placed in a basket. Never mind that Sargon had the same history. You know, it's all factually true. No, just kidding. We don't know whether it's true. The point is we choose to remember it. We assign meaning to it. And that meaning that we assign to it has a path-clearing power. It is motivating. It reminds us of such things as, yes, in fact, Judaism, which I don't call Judaism, but anyway, Jewish civilization, Judaic civilization is indeed about love. Yes, it's about the people that matter to you, the people that have taken care of you, the people who give a damn, if you don't mind my saying so, irrespective of whether you happen to love them in one or another moment, yes? Or whether they are receptive to you in one or another moment. But leaving that aside, here are some figments, some elements of conventional, you might say traditional Jewish memory on Sfardim, conversos, etc. Okay. Anti-Semitism from the Gospels to the Spanish Inquisition to Hitler. I'm sure you've heard variants of that phrase. The Spanish Inquisition persecuted Jews. Jews were expelled during the Spanish Inquisition from Spain. Spanish Jews were expelled on the 9th of Av. I don't know if this is that current, but there is that particular piece of the narrative. Marranos, and I'm using the term advisedly, held Judaism secret or somehow in their hearts. Okay, now let me sort of remove the curtain from behind the Wizard of Oz, from in front of the Wizard of Oz, and tell you that all these statements have kernels of truth, or are based on kernels of truth, but they are woefully, I don't want to say marred, but they are vitiated, they're weakened by some slight and not so slight inaccuracies, okay? My purpose today, among others, is to try to disentangle some facts from memory, and to, in a sense, to stimulate you in a way that will allow you to think of memory in more historicized terms. Oh, this is the other one. The Hidden Jews of Spain, or the New Spain. Okay. So, I don't know if you can see this very clearly. So, some of you in the front certainly can. This is a very, very powerful painting. It's powerful not so much artistically as because of its design. Okay. It's still, well, I think this is now in the, sorry. You need the microphone in order for people. I'm sorry. Sorry, I don't know how much you lost, but anyway, I think the original is now in the Prado Museum. Regardless, it shows essentially a pyramidal scheme, yeah? You have the Virgin and the Child over here, and two monarchs over here. For $5 and the chance to win a refrigerator. Who are they? Ferdinand and Isabel, or Fernando and Isabel, right? Next to them are a series of, VIPs. You have some royal bureaucrats, if you will, friars. This fellow here may be Tomás Torquemada. Some say, I don't think that's proven. Anyway, these guys are the big shots, right? Because they have halos, they have specific attributes attached to them. This is Saint Dominic. I don't remember this. Maybe Saint Bartholomew. No, but Bartholomew has poor guy. Bartholomew has his own skin. He carries his own skin because he was skinned alive. Now this I think is maybe it's Aquinas. I'm not sure. Anyway, sorry, I forget. So the point here is that this is a very orderly structure. And it presents these two monarchs as devotees of their god. Yes? It's a very orderly picture, which actually tends to diminish the importance of clerics. Not the saints, but clerics, yeah? The most important characters, in fact, the one with the biggest head is none other than Isabel. Why is that? Well, because we're talking about a context in which Isabel and her husband Fernando were busy completing the Reconquista, right? This is the so-called reconquest of the of the Iberian Peninsula, excuse me. Why reconquest as opposed to conquest? Any guesses? Right, but the idea is that it had previously been ruled by Christians, specifically by Visigothic Christians, and so what these guys sought to do was to retake it, right? To take it up, to take it once again. Okay, this is a picture also of state centralization, of a very, well thought out process and project of centralizing authority, of institutionalizing a central authority, and homogenizing, therefore, the cultures of what became known as Spain, but was really just a collection of statelets. Navarre, Aragon, Castile, etc. This, by the way, is a map of the later Reconquista. Notice the big pink blob is Castile, now having absorbed León and Galicia, right, the region of Galicia, and Asturias, right? And over here you have the crown, the green crown of Aragon. You have this orange rump called Navarra, and here you have Portugal. Here is the last remaining Muslim kingdom in the peninsula, that which fell 2 years after this painting was completed in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and a lot of nasty things happened to the Jews. Okay, so this period of cultural homogenization saw the cresting, you might say the apex, of a phenomenon which was really a pan-Western European phenomenon, but had unique expression and saw unique severity in Spain. And that is the phenomenon that a colleague by the name of Jeremy Cohen has called anti-Judaism. Notice it's not anti-Semitism, which is a modern 19th century, pseudoscientific phenomenon. Anti-Judaism is, to be very sort of brief, is the belief that Jews are not only blind to the truth of Christianity, as indeed many Christian theologians had argued for many centuries, but that Jews are actively hostile and therefore very dangerous to the welfare of Christendom, that they seek actively to subvert Christianity and therefore to imperil the souls of Christians, right? And that therefore Jews have got to be eliminated. How so? Not in the way that the Nazis proposed much later and actually tried to carry out much later, but really through conversionism. The fundamental argument of anti-Judaism, which was, by the way, in many ways developed by Iberian theologians, was that Jews were not tolerable as Jews. What was wrong with Jews was their quote-unquote religion. As I argued this afternoon, Jews, in fact, don't have a religion. They have a comprehensive culture, and they don't call it Judaism. The Greeks call it Judaism, and it's only about the 19th century that Jews started to call it Judaism in order to render themselves legible to non-Jews. What do the Jews call their culture? It's a trick question. Originally, what did the Jews call their culture? Yeah. Ah, very good. So this is, in other words, it's not the culture that they're naming, it's the people that bears the culture. Yes? So there are a lot of names for Israel. Bnei Israel, children of Israel. Beit Yaakov, huh? Am Israel, correct. Edat Israel, the community of Israel. The house of Jacob. You can even go for something much more, lofty, like Goy Kadosh, right? Am Segula, right? A holy nation, a treasured nation, Mamlechet Kohanim, yeah, a kingdom of priests. These are all biblical terms for the same entity. There's not, in fact, one name for the culture of the Judean Israelites. Sometimes in the core text of the rabbinic tradition, you see terms like, the assumption of the yoke of Torah, or Chayei HaTorah, the life of Torah, leading the life of Torah, right? But that's rare. In fact, I don't know if maybe Michael told me this joke or somebody, I don't know, but you know, the joke goes something like this. So a biped stands in front of a lake or in front of a pond, and there's a fish. And you told me this joke, no? No? Okay. Sorry. But let me put it this way. This is the kind of joke, the kind of synthesis of great ideas that Rabbi Michael excels in. Okay. So the biped asks the fish, how's the water? And the fish goes, what's water? Exactly. So this is the same way in which Jews experience their culture. It was just there. It was them. They were Bnei Israel, the ones, who left Egypt, under the banner of a mighty outstretched divine arm and so forth. Okay, so anti-Judaism crested in, why that diversion? I don't know. But anyway, the phenomenon of anti-Judaism was essentially a conversionist phenomenon. Absent the Jews' exit, let's say their expulsion, right? They should be converted because what was wrong with them was something called Judaism. And Judaism was categorically wrong. Okay, what if Jews don't convert? Well, you kick them out. That's partly why in 1391 there were riots throughout Castile and Aragon mostly, starting from the south, from Seville, and spreading outward to envelop the entire peninsula. As a result of these riots, something like half to two-thirds of Aragonese and Castilian Jews converted under duress to Christianity. And we're talking about people who tried to outflank the rioters by just going straight to the baptismal font, or who were dragged to the baptismal font, etc. Or who might have tried to escape and actually did cross over into Portugal, but then realized, okay, I'm completely destitute. I have to go back and try to reclaim some of my property. And how to do so? Well, partly by becoming a Christian, so forth. Okay. So this vast and really unprecedented phenomenon of mass conversion gave rise to the problem of new Christians, also known as Judeo-conversos, right? Now, these are the terms. I was talking with both rabbis this morning about this matter, actually this early afternoon. New Christians and Judeo-conversos are the most common terms found in the historical documentation. People have called them other things, but these are the terms that I've started to use. In fact, conversos is now quite common, just plain conversos, right? But I've started now to, in deference to historians' usage, I've used conversos as well, but I've started to get a little bit sort of, pedantic. Now I use Judeo-conversos or new Christians. What about the term marranos, right? So this is a term that was in very frequent use in the 1960s and 70s. Very, very good historians employed the term. The reason that I don't use it is that it is pejorative, at least in Castilian. Some would argue that in Portuguese, it's not. Okay, fair enough. But, and it's not, by the way, it's not as though new Christians isn't pejorative. It is pejorative. To say that somebody's a new Christian instead of just a Christian when he or she has been baptized is mean. It's saying you're not quite a regular kind of Christian. So why new Christians and non-marranos? I argue, well, because, there is such a thing as, pardon my horrible language, you can call somebody queer, or you can call somebody a faggot, right? And I think one has much more venom, at least in social discourse, than the other. And in fact, one has been reclaimed, yeah? I mean, I used to live in the inner Sunset in the 90s when I first heard the word queer used positively. And I thought, wow, this is an interesting development. Okay, all right, so one Jewish response to the crisis of persecution, even before the 1391 conversion, was the the growth, the development of an already existing body of, you might say, knowledge, mystical knowledge and practice known broadly as Kabbalah. Kabbalah simply means something like that which has been received, or tradition, right? And nowadays is used to refer to all Jewish mysticism throughout the ages. In fact, I would say pedantically that that is strictly untrue. That Kabbalah is a specific form that arose in the 12th century in Provence, which is was, and to some extent still is, a very fertile cultural area that brought together Jews from the north and their texts, and Jews from the south and their texts. Yes. So what happens though when Kabbalah is received by, was received by Aragonese, Navarrese, and Castilian savants, is that Kabbalah develops its own, you might say, Castilian and Aragonese character. And that character is very much informed by the anti-Jewish polemics to which Iberian Jews were exposed at that time. Oops, sorry. So Kabbalah, as you know if you've taken classes here on the subject, was essentially a way to harmonize, whether the Kabbalists admitted it or not, was to harmonize two strands of thinking that were highly appealing. One was what you might call Greco-Arabic philosophy, in other words, classical Greek philosophy as interpreted by Arab, or not necessarily Arab, but by Muslim thinkers, right? From Damascus to Baghdad, to Ifriqiya, all the way to Morocco and into Spain, right? Plato, Aristotle, you name it. Okay, and the other strand was, of course, Jewish tradition itself. And what is Jewish tradition? Well, it's a tradition of a God who really is not to be conflated with nature or with, or with physical reality, but who's very active within physical reality. So, the God of philosophy, if you will, the God of Plato, to mention one, is a very abstract God, is an ineffable God, is a God who is described as a prime mover, an unmoved mover, a cause of causes, or what have you. You can speak about this God in very negative terms. You know what this God is not. It is not a person. It is not finite. But you can barely, if at all, explain what that God is. Yes? An utterly inapproachable, totally abstract God who is beyond time, beyond space. On the other hand, the God of the Torah, right? Since we're we're reveling here in Shavuot. The God of the Torah, the God who is depicted in the Torah, and I mean Torah narrowly and broadly. Torah is not just Tanakh, Torah is also Mishnah, Gemara, and subsequent commentaries. And arguably, any time you talk about Jewish subjects, you are doing some kind of Torah. But anyway, I digress. The God of the Torah is you might say, a personal God. A God who gets angry. A God who wants you to eat this, but not that. A God who has regrets. Oh, I was too tough here. A God who, who creates in ways that are not exactly clear. Did Chava come out of the body of Adam, or did Chava just sort of coexist with Adam? There are two narratives there, and they're not necessarily, compatible. At any rate, so Kabbalah was one way to try to harmonize the God of philosophy and the God of the burning bush. Yes, the cause of causes and the burning bush, the God of the burning bush. How did the Kabbalists do that? Well, they created a very elegant system that, according to which God, in essence, has two primary dimensions, if you will. Kivyachol, right? One is his completely incomprehensible, abstract, quote-unquote, hidden dimension. That dimension which can be defined negatively in language and through language, but cannot really be grasped in positive terms. And that is the Ein Sof. Ein without Sof, end. The endless, the infinite, right? That is the aspect of God that for some unfathomable reason and in some unfathomable way pours out of itself everything that is manifest, all reality with a capital R that we can comprehend at some level. At a very primordial level, that reality which God emanates, that he, quote unquote, reveals, that the endless dimension of God reveals, is none other than God's personality, if you will, right? 10 attributes, or not really attributes, 10 potencies, 10 powers that together make his being present and comprehensible in positive terms in our lives, especially the life of Bnei Israel. We just sang, right? La Adonai ha, where's it? Gevura veha, I forget. Okay, the Gevura, Netzach, Hod, all these things, right? So where do the names of these qualities come from? They come from the Tanakh, right? And they're often presented by the Kabbalists as a very orderly system, either as a menorah, right? Or as this, quote-unquote, tree or primordial quasi-human entity, or as the previous image suggested, as the emanation, as if in a quiet pond, from the unfathomable first cause, all the way to things like inanimate objects and so forth. So you might say that the circles, the concentric circles that are closest to the original point of God's will to reveal Himself, right, are things like the Sephirot, these qualities, these powers, and then you have the heavenly host, all kinds of non-physical entities that form part of the, let's say, the retinue of the heavens, of the gods, all the way to human beings, then animals, then inanimate objects, and so forth. The finite, that which is trapped by time and by space, and is ultimately perishable. Yeah? Okay, so Kabbalah, in a way, was a response to, as I said before, two key intellectual trends that were influencing Iberian Jews as much as Provençal Jews. However, in Spain, the Zohar, which was the most important work of Kabbalah, took on a very interesting counter-polemical not only tone, really, but substance. And I quote, "A Gentile accosted Rabbi Elazar, saying, 'You say that you are closer to the Supreme King than all other nations. One who is close to the king is always happy with no pain, fear, or oppression. But you Jews, are always in pain and grief, more oppressed than all other people in the world. As for us, Christians, no pain, oppression, or grief even comes near. We are close to the Supreme King. You are far from him.'" Okay, so this is the accusation. You guys are so forlorn. Look at you. Homeless, dispersed throughout the world, oppressed by your host Gentile communities. Never mind that we're the ones who are oppressing you. This is just a fact. Exactly. So, precisely. So now we have the response, right? Rabbi Elazar stared at this man, and he turned into a heap of bones. Then the rabbi said, "The words spoken by that wicked man I once asked the prophet Elijah. He told me that these words were once arranged before the blessed Holy One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the academy in heaven." Notice, God has, this manifest God of the 10 Sefirot has an academy. He is like a rabbi. He is the uber rabbi. Yes, it's very Durkheimian, right? The idea, the French Jewish sociologist Durkheim says that divinities, deities, are really projections of human cultures. But I leave that aside. Okay. All right. So I asked this of Eliyahu, and this was the response. Indeed, we are closer to the Supreme King than all other nations. Sorry about the typo. Indeed, it is so, for the Blessed Holy One has made Israel the heart of the whole world. Thus, Israel lives among the other nations as the heart among the limbs of the body. It's a very interesting reading of dispersion, of relative political powerlessness. We are dispersed because we are here to serve as the heart of the entire world. Okay. Just as the limbs cannot exist even for a moment without the heart, so all the nations cannot exist without Israel. The heart is tender and weak, yet it is the life of all the limbs. Only the heart perceives pain and trouble and grief, for it contains life and intelligence. The other limbs are not close to the king. They have no life. They perceive nothing. This is a riff on the rather ancient, you might say 1st or 2nd century rabbinic notion found in the Mishnah that the world exists for Israel to realize the Torah, right? And the Torah exists in order for Israel to fulfill it. This is ethnocentrism 101. And you might say, well, that's bad. Excuse me. Just ask the Native Americans what they call themselves. They call themselves things like the holy people or the people. And the other groups are the people who wear skins like this, or the people who live by the river, or the people who weave baskets like this. In other words, the centrality of the nation, the small, relatively powerless nation, is a given, right? So ethnocentrism, yes, but we don't have to think of it necessarily as chauvinism. Okay. All right, so Israel, in a sense, allows not only the other cultures, but the world itself to exist. Okay. Another aspect of Zoharic counter-polemics, and by the way, the Zohar was, is piously attributed to Shimon Bar Yochai from the 2nd century, a Mishnaic sage, but scholars have, I think, conclusively, demonstrated that large parts of the Zohar were written by a fellow by the name of Moshe de Leon, a Castilian Kabbalist, who, in a sense, wrote, you might say, automatically. He was in a kind of trance, or so it is proposed. In any case, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and again, I'm sorry about the typo, said, when the Torah scroll is taken from the ark to be read in public, the heavenly gates of compassion are opened, and love is aroused above. And a person should say the following: Blessed be the name of the Master of the world. I am a servant of the Blessed Holy One, before whom and before whose glorious Torah I bow at all times. Right? Anachnu kor'im v'mishtachavim. I do not place my trust in a human being. Hint, hint, hint. I don't believe in that guy who looks like a member of Lynyrd Skynyrd. Right? But rather on the God of heaven, who is the God of truth, and whose Torah is truth, whose prophets are truth, and who abounds in deeds of goodness and truth. In him do I trust. To his holy and glorious name I utter praises. Okay, so you belong, and I mean this literally, you belong, I belong, to a people that is constantly under pressure, right? Nowadays, the argument is, oh, no, I'm not anti-Jewish. I'm just anti-Zionist. Yeah. Whatever. So, okay, but in any case, something is wrong about us from many non-Jewish points of view. Okay, the same is true of Moshe de Leon and his peers. They were dealing with major destruction. And here they were, rhetorically, to be sure, but they were still building a rhetorical tradition which put them at the center of the universe, not just the world, but the universe. And it gave them the dignity, right, to proclaim their certainty and their own and their value, right? Their own value. The Blessed Holy One has one sun who shines from one end of the world to the other. He is great. He is the great and mighty tree of life, whose head reaches toward heaven and whose roots are rooted in the holy ground. The tree of life, yeah, the Sephirotic tree. That's the Son of God, the real Son of God, right? The mystery of the Word is written concerning the mystery on high. What is His name? What is the name of His Son, if you know? That name is known. Adonai Tzvaot is His name. The name of His Son? Israel is His name, as it is written, my firstborn son, Israel. All the keys of faith hang from Israel. He praises Himself, saying, Adonai has said to me, you are my son. Indeed it is so, for father and mother have crowned Him and blessed Him with countless crowns. They have commanded everyone, kiss the Son, kiss the hand of this Son, as if it were possible. He has given Him the power over all, for all will worship Him, lest He turn angry. For He has been crowned with judgment and compassion, keter and chesed, right? Judgment for one who deserves judgment, compassion for one who deserves compassion. All the blessings of the world above and the world below belong to His Son. The Son of God is not that fellow from Nazareth. In fact, according to a very famous or infamous rabbinic collection of legends, this quote-unquote Son of God was not the son of a virgin, but in fact the son of a whore. And not only did He not possess a genuine power, but He was a black magician, yes, a master of the black arts. I'm not endorsing this view. I'm simply saying it is there, and it is precisely part of the environment that generated also this kind of counter-polemic, right? So we know who God is, we know who we are, we know who the Son of God is. Okay. In this horrible environment of mass conversions and loss of property and post-traumatic stress, I can only imagine, we see the rise in 1478 of a unified Spanish Inquisition. There was an Inquisition, particularly in Aragon, prior to 1478, but it was an Episcopal Inquisition. In other words, one that was run locally by bishops, and it had varying, let's say, levels of severity according to the local bishops. However, what Ferdinand and Isabel lobbied for was a unified Inquisition, you might say a nationwide Inquisition that they could control, to which they could appoint functionaries. And so, at the Cortes of Toledo, not only did the you might say the full-fledged Spanish Inquisition start to operate, but also the Jews of Castile were ordered to inhabit specially designated neighborhoods. Not that they couldn't get out of them, but they had to maintain a curfew, right? They had to abide by a curfew. This was a way of, the attempt at least, was to separate openly professing Jews, those who did not convert, right, in 1391 and beyond, to separate them from the group known as the New Christians or Conversos, so that the New Christians or Conversos or Judeo-Conversos could be properly Christianized. At the same time, the functionaries that ended up leading the Holy Office of the Inquisition lobbied precisely for there to be an Inquisition, so that the conversos who allegedly or actually maintained some of their ancestral culture could be properly re-educated and so that at least they would stop fraternizing with their Jewish friends, business associates, relatives, in some cases, spouses and children. This period saw the proliferation of works, anti-Jewish works, very hostile to conversos, not just Jews. In other words, if you're a classic anti-Jew, what you argue is that Judaism is wrong and that it has to be, defeated through arguments, so through a logical argument. Fair enough. But the argument now was that conversos were somehow, infected with this horrible disease, this horrible intellectual and moral disease of Judaism. Yeah, again, it's a Christian term, Judaism, and so they had to be associated with the evils of Jews. A famous treatise called El Alboraico, or the Tratado del Alboraique, gave expression to some of this, let's say, anti-converso ideology. Alboraico or Alboraique is a word from Arabic. Al-Burak was the name of the beast that allegedly, per tradition, Muhammad rode before his final ascent to the heavens. He rode this beast to the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and or the site where the mosque was eventually established, so the tradition goes. So I say it's a beast because it was really a kind of bizarre hybrid, like a chimerical being, yes? According to various descriptions, it had the wings of a bat, the legs of a horse, the face of a monkey. It was just a bizarre thing, right? So the reason that the anonymous author of the Alboraique decided to use this term is that he wanted to define conversos as bizarre, you might say, culturally hybrid beasts, yes? Neither full-fledged Christians, nor full-fledged Jews, nor much of anything. Neither men nor women, right? In other words, it's completely vague. And this was the problem, right, from the standpoint of the polemicists who wanted to associate conversos with Jewishness and with its evil. Friar Alonso Espina's Fortalitium Fidei, Fortress of the Faith, which was written about 20 years before the Alboraico, was notable because it applied to conversos, to Judeo-conversos, all the canards that anti-Jewish polemicists had directed originally at Jews. For example, that Jews have a distinctive and foul odor, the fetor judaicus, or that, that anything that Jews plant withers away. In other words, they are incapable of productivity, especially when they work the earth. Or that Jewish men menstruate. Or that Jews are born with their hands attached to their foreheads, and that they must curse Christians in order to overcome this particular, grotesque malady, and so on and so on and so on. The point was to lambast conversos as, in a sense, as not very far from the Jews. This was also the era in which a kind of what I call proto-racism developed. In other words, notions that identity is inherited magically by quote-unquote blood, or through other sorts of physical, bodily fluids. Yes. Sorry, did you have a question?
So I wanted to make a comment and ask a question.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that the motivation for the Inquisition is basically the bringing of the redemption, and that the redemption basically doesn't come because of the unfaithful Jews.
Well,
how do you explain the motivations besides discrimination in general?
Yeah. So the Inquisition was never empowered to persecute Jews qua Jews. In other words, people who had never been baptized were very, very seldom prosecuted by the Inquisition. The Inquisition had a mandate from the Pope to essentially to rectify the behavior and the beliefs of baptized Christians who committed the crime called Judaizing. In other words, acting and believing like a Jew in accordance not with Jewish culture, but in accordance with the church, right? So In that sense, yes, the Inquisition did have a kind of redemptive, an overarching redemptive purpose, because how can you have redemption when you have Christians, baptized Christians, who believe like non-Christians and who act like non-Christians, right? But in fact, and you might say that the theology of the people who lobbied for the establishment of the Inquisition was certainly very capacious. I mean, they were classic anti-Jews, and so they viewed the destruction of Jewish culture as a net positive from the viewpoint of having Christ come back and make everything groovy. Yeah. It is a messianic, yes, of course. It's a messianic enterprise, but it is also an enterprise that is comprehensible in terms of the political project of the Catholic kings. Not to underplay their Catholicism, their religious motivation. They really were a crusading monarchy, yes, a dual monarchy. They really believed that their role was to serve as the cutting edge of their church. And this is very different, for example, from the self-image of other monarchs in Europe at the time, who believed that, they might protect the church, but they had their own interests, and they didn't always concur with those of the popes. So yes, there is a messianic motif, but there's also one that has to do with making the Christian society homogeneous, disciplined, and therefore capable of leading the path towards not just the complete, let's say, the complete defeat of the Saracens, the Muslims, but also eventually redeeming the entire world. Okay, I was saying that one epiphenomenon of all this is the development of the idea of cleanliness or cleanness of blood, also referred to as purity of blood. This is the idea that if you have Jewish ancestors, then you have an inborn propensity to Judaize, right? To act and believe like a Jew, and therefore to subvert a properly Christian society. This is part and parcel of pre-modern thinking about identity, right? We see it, not in with the same nefarious meaning, right? But we see it in notions that, an Israelite is somebody whose mother is an Israelite, or who becomes naturalized into the main body of Israelite culture, and so forth. And needless to say, this has its modern counterparts in racism proper, which appeals to science in a way that makes it junk science, but regardless, some of that is based on the magical thinking that gave rise to this kind of proto-racism. And the proto-racism to which I refer was not adopted broadly. It was mostly there because various social institutions in which that conveyed prestige to its members decided we shall have no quote-unquote new Christians among us. We will not allow people of Jewish, or for that matter Muslim, ancestry to join our ranks and to therefore enjoy our status. Okay. In 1478, as I mentioned before, the Pope granted de facto inquisitorial power to the Catholic monarchs. The Pope was always involved in the running of the Inquisition at some level because technically he oversaw the entire institution, but realistically we have to understand that it was Ferdinand and Isabel and their successors who called the shots. Now, the Inquisition was very, or at least the inquisitorial functionaries were very active in campaigns, political campaigns, to expel the Jews. And, there have been books written about the expulsion. Why were the Jews expelled? What were the monarchs trying to do? I recommend just reading the expulsion edict. The expulsion edict is very straightforward. We don't want the conversos to be exposed to these Jews. If they have Jews around them, they will continue to Judaize. They, meaning the new Christians, yes? However, the Holy Office, as I mentioned before, did not usually prosecute any Jews, that is to say, people who'd never converted, yeah? It had to prove that people who were baptized were acting in quote-unquote Jewish ways. Now, one thing I have to clarify, and I think I do later, but I want to mention it now, is that the term New Christian started to acquire you might say, a cross-generational, transgenerational meaning. New Christian is a phrase that means exactly what it says. Somebody has just become a Christian, is a recently baptized person. However, in 16th century Spain, and later in Portugal, the phrase New Christian started to be applied to the children of actual converts, and to the grandchildren, and to the great-grandchildren. In other words, it acquired a quasi-ethnic, a racialist quality, right? In other words, you could never escape the status and the stigma that attached to being descended from Jews, or for that matter, Muslims, although Muslims were given the also pejorative term moriscos, that is to say, Muslims who converted. Okay, so this is, I don't know why the slide does what it does, but it's an idealized view of the inquisitorial project as a whole. Notice here you have a number of reos, a number of prisoners who are about to be read their sentence and are going to be, in essence, compelled to either abjure their crimes or receive the worst possible punishment that their crimes merit, according to this legal system. So they're wearing what are known as sanbenitos or sacos benditos. These are sort of almost like, well, they're penitential garments, but they're intended to be like, I don't know, like sandwich board advertisements of their crimes. In other words, their names are emblazoned on them, the crimes, the likely punishment. All these things were painted on the sanbenitos, and not only to humiliate the prisoners, but eventually, after their deaths, to stigmatize their families, right? Because these sanbenitos were hung, or they were supposed to be hung in parish churches, in the very parish churches that the convicts and their families attended. The idea was to mark the families as the families as families of potential religious criminals. Okay. So exactly, social media with a vengeance, yes? Okay, here are two people about to be executed. I'm sorry for the violence of the image. What's interesting here is that you have, of course, the presence of friars. Dominican friars were by far the most active of the inquisitors. There are also some Dominicans, but they were the ones who really ran the show. Here you have a very interesting tableau. This is none other than St. Dominic, right? So it shows you the degree of sort of mythification of the Inquisition. Here he is presiding over something called an auto de fe, or an act of faith, essentially a sentencing ceremony, right, in which the prisoners are read their sentences, they're given a chance to recant, and regardless, they are released to the secular arm of the law. In other words, friars were not allowed, were not supposed to enact the punishments. They weren't even allowed to break anybody's skin. So even when torture was administered, and that's under certain particular legal circumstances, it was not the friars who did the punishing. It was lay officers. And so the idea is that the state, at least secular authorities, are as involved in the persecution and prosecution of alleged religious criminals as the church itself. Okay. Now, the question arises from many, many discussions of the new Christians / Judeo-conversos. Were these conversos Jews? Well, to answer that question, we have to look at what Jews are, as distinct from what the Inquisition thought that Jews are. Jews are fundamentally a people, and according to various anthropologists, two of whom I prefer, there are key elements that define all peoples. You know, the Irish, the Italians, the Danes, whoever. They are a proper name or names, by which the people are known to themselves and to others. Second, a sense of kinship, either physical, genealogical, or cultural, or both. Okay? In other words, you can feel culturally kin to somebody without having to prove that you are all descended of, I don't know, Abraham and Sarah. Elements of a common culture, right? And I'll talk about culture in a moment. Fourth, a collective memory, which could be viewed as an element of culture, but it earns its own place in the list because it consists of very, very significant narratives. Narratives that orient the members of the group in its self-concept and in its behavior. Number five, a connection with a homeland, right? Whether the homeland is almost like a never land that people actually never see, or whether the group in question actually controls the homeland. The key is the connection, the mental connection to the homeland. Six is, you might say, the sum total of items 1 through 5, namely a sense of solidarity among at least key segments of the ethnic group or the national group in question. This, by the way, is where we have a lot of crises in American Jewish life today, right? We have a number of Jews who have broken solidarity for good or bad reasons. I don't care. The point is that this is where things tend to break down. Now, what is the common culture of the Jews? Okay, if you surveyed, let's say, the Dominican friars who ran the Holy Office, they would say, well, Judaism is like they would say this literally, but they would argue it's like an inverted mirror image of Christianity, right? It's belief not in the law of Christ, it's belief in the law of Moses. Belief, right? And specifically, it is the belief that if you follow the law of Moses, you're going to be saved. This, my friends, is a Christian idea through and through, okay? There's no such thing in normative Judaism. We talked about this in the afternoon earlier. The notion of Jewish redemption is collective, it's historical, it's public. It has nothing to do with this idea that your soul is going to somehow float like Casper the Friendly Ghost onto the heavens and somehow be happy there. Okay. So, but what is actually Jewish culture? Okay. And parenthetically, I think I don't want to be so nasty, but I think a lot of people have difficulty articulating this, even though they feel it in their bones. What is Jewish culture? It's a language or languages. What language do Jews speak? English! Wait a minute. But wait, that's the language of the English. Correct. How many Jews in the United States speak Hebrew with any kind of fluency? Very few. But, look, just to illustrate the point, the former director of my department is a scholar of the Bible, among other classic texts. He knows Hebrew, both modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew, backwards and forwards, right? And he's, I would say, quite fluent, if not entirely fluent. He's not Jewish, okay? So the relationship he has with the Hebrew language is different than the relationship that I have with the Hebrew language. Yeah? In other words, I hear Hebrew, I look at Hebrew and I think, ooh, that's mine, that's me, that's us, right? This man, a very learned man, a man who has a tremendous deep understanding of Jewish culture, does not relate to Hebrew in quite that way. So it's not the language that you actually speak, it's how you relate to the language if you happen not to speak it. Is it optimal to speak the language? Yes, of course, because then you're not reading yourself, you're not reading your culture in translation, you're reading the straight dope. Okay, another. Notice, I put it in purple. Why? Because theology and rites of worship are only one element of culture. They're not a definitive element, even according to halakha. Okay? What is misnamed Judaism is not a series of theological propositions that you have to believe. Yeah? The idea is God gave you Torah, yeah? Gave you Torah at Sinai, which we're commemorating now. And 600,000 or however many Israelites were there. And if you choose not to believe that this happened, well, that's your problem. But there are a lot of people who saw it. You don't have to believe that there was a guy who went to a cave who got a revelation, or you don't have to believe that there was a guy who lived a long time ago who was really cool and he really made, many loaves out of few loaves, or that caused the dead to rise. You don't have to believe anything. It's not a persuasion game. It happened. It's a fact, at least so it's understood. And we now have a duty. We have to do according to the Torah. However we read the Torah, we have to encounter it, we have to know it. And by the way, I say, to be fair to ourselves, we cannot reject anything that we don't know. We can't say, that's baloney. Okay, if you're going to say that, you have to explain to me why it's baloney. And you have to therefore know what it is that you're rejecting. That's me pontificating. I'm off my soapbox. Okay, so that's theology and rites of worship. Of course, ethical values. You might say even a philosophy is part of culture, or philosophies are part of culture. Now, I would argue that while Jewish culture, Jewish history has given rise to philosophers, by and large, Jewish culture is not philosophical, at least it's not systematically so. There are theological ideas, but they're not arranged into some sort of elegant system. I mean, when Rambam, when the famous Maimonides came up with his 13 principles, his peers, his colleagues said, why not 7? Why not 3? Why not 1? You're out of your mind. Get out of here. Okay? Now, I'm being facetious, but the point is that this kind of systematization, this kind of, let's say philosophizing, is in essence something that was adopted from the outside, from the Arab scholars in Damascus and Baghdad. Right? By whom was it adopted? Well, by people like Saadia Gaon and Maimonides himself. At any rate, history. Again, what happened to the people is part of the culture, right? Including, which shoe did you put on first this morning? In other words, from the trivial to the highly significant. Literature, both canonical and non-canonical. Everything from, the canon or the core elements of the canon to, what's the name of that comedian who wrote that silly song about Hanukkah? Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song. Now, not everything has to be accepted or known by all Jews. I must confess, I've never heard that song. I know about it, because my students have known about it, but I don't know that song. The point is, it is, in a sense, it is part of the, let's say, the genius of the people. And in this case, it's non-canonical, but it still can be significant to many of the members. Laws and customs. Okay, so this is part and parcel. This is the meat and potatoes of the rabbinic profession, right? Or should be. What are the laws and what are the minhagim? Minhagim, customs, are actually given quasi-legal force and status in much Jewish tradition. Wearing a kippah, for example. Yeah? Where's the kippah that Michael lent me? This is actually not obligatory. But you go to Jerusalem, will people acknowledge this? Yeah, technically it's not obligatory, but they're going to do it. Why? Because that's what a Jew does in their book, in their world. I'm talking about the Orthodox, of course. Not every Jerusalemite is Orthodox. Patterns of socialization and sociability. This is something that is actually worth remembering as a phrase, in my opinion, right? Whenever I ask people who are Jewish, who identify as Jews, to tell me how and why they're Jewish without religion, this is what they lean on. But it's very difficult for them to actually say it. Yeah? You know the game Jewish geography? Right? This is part of it. This is a recognition of similar sociability and socialization patterns. Oh, you're from Los Gatos? Oh, do you know so-and-so? And oh, did you go to camp such and such? And if you didn't go to camp, well, where are your people from? Oh, do they know so-and-so? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Institutions, yeah, familial, governmental, etc. No matter how they end up, where they live, Jews set up institutions of some kind. This morning I mentioned that institutional life for Jews in the United States is highly, highly denominational and congregational. This is new. This is actually quite sui generis. Yes, it has not been like this in history. What has happened is that Jews have created formal communities, autonomous communities, in which they elect their leaders, yeah, out of let's say, an uber class of propertied and educated people, and they often hire a rabbi, a communal rabbi, and they lead their lives as much as they can according to halakha. They provide their entire welfare system. Not just the bath, not just the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, not just the schools, not just the doctor, not just the butcher shop, everything. Don't wait for the New Deal, yeah? Just look at halakha. That's the idea. Okay, so here's a graphic representation of what I've just gone over. What do all these things really amount to? They amount to a system that is that puts a very high premium on collectivity. It puts a very high premium on publicity and on historicity. I was talking about this afternoon. Collectivity means the emphasis on what happens to the group and the behavior of the members of the group towards each other. This is key. There's no such thing as being a Jew on a desert island. That's why the joke exists. You know the joke. A boat finds a Jew on a desert island, and the sailors find that this Jew has built for himself 3 synagogues. Right? You know this joke. Okay. Why 3 synagogues? Because the fellow is habituated to collectivity. And so he has to invent the Jews that are not there. Okay? The synagogue he goes to, the synagogue he can't stand, and the synagogue that maybe some of his relatives might go to, or whatever. Okay. Historicity. Again, redemption is something that happens here. Redemption is something that happens, this is also Kabbalah, through the efforts of people in the here and now. It is not supposed to lead you to some ethereal realm, or rather, the ethereal realm that others imagine to transcend the world is actually something that is going to, in a sense, to be realized in the world. And what does that fabulous world look like? Well, it looks a lot like the land of Israel. In fact, it is the land of Israel, where all Jews shall reside according to this understanding, and they will be ruled by a guy who is the descendant of King David. Okay, so collectivity, publicity, and historicity. Punchline. These are precisely the elements that were missing for the new Christians, especially once the Jews were expelled between 1492 and 1498. Okay? So, I started with the idea that what I study is how cultures are put together, how they can fall apart. Well, this is the culture of the new Christians. The Jewishness, if you will, without publicity, without historicity, without collectivity. And after 1492 to 1498, without the well springs of knowledge that make Jews Jewish. Don't believe the hype. Pardon me. It's not your mom who makes you Jewish. It's your socialization that makes you Jewish. If you put a guy in a colony of wolves as a baby, he will think of himself as a wolf until it becomes impossible for him to behave as a wolf. Okay? By the same token, Jews acquire their culture in a social setting. So that, for example, somebody wishes to become a Jew, that somebody has to become re-educated, re-socialized as a Jew. It's a social issue, social phenomenon. Okay. So conversos lacked the building blocks of Jewish identity, especially after 1492 to 1498. So what were their identities actually like? Well, nowadays, unlike in many years past, there is a consensus that conversos really are describable in terms of a spectrum. Okay, so let me introduce you to a certain typology. First and foremost, oh, by the way, the term New Christian by the 16th century doesn't mean a convert. Again, it means a descendant of converts. Okay, somebody who's been baptized from the beginning In other words, there's no let's say, active Jewish memory there. Okay. The first type consists of formerly Jewish resistors, people who had actually been Jews, yeah, who had to convert under duress, and then they tried to maintain, however imperfectly, their old habits. Yes? After 1530, these people tended to cease to exist. Why? Because it was impossible for them to maintain any kind of Jewish momentum. The persecution was so severe that either they were driven completely underground, or they simply could not maintain anything that they remembered about active, open, public, historical, collective Jewish life. There were the alienated, de-Judaicized people who felt different, and who knew that they came from Jews, and who tried in some sense to actualize their feeling of difference. And very often, in order to defy inquisitorial and almost quasi-racist persecution, they settled upon what I like to summarize with the term anti-Christianity. What do I mean by that? Well, if there is a feast among the Christians, I'm gonna fast in secret. If there's a fast among the Christians, I'm gonna feast. Okay? If the priest says, don't do this, well, I'm gonna do this. Yes? In other words, it's also a very, let's say, a very biblicist approach to Christianity. It's saying, well, I'm familiar with some stories from the quote-unquote Old Testament. Parenthesis, the Old Testament is not the Tanakh. Okay? They're great points of overlap, but they're points of difference. Okay, so it means reading the Old Testament or hearing about the Old Testament, and even reading anti-Jewish work like Fortress of the Faith or the Alboraico, and thinking, this is what Jews really do. This is what Jews really are. In other words, it's like taking the word queer and appropriating it and saying, that's cool, I'm going to be queer, with pride, hence the notion of gay pride and so forth. So there are these types. I think that we can call those guys the alleged crypto Jews. They're as Jewish as I am, Japanese. There are the relativists, people who fell into a pretty well-known, well-documented Iberian tradition that ordinary people embraced, that was quite tolerant. Now, it was not the preference of the Holy Office, it was not the preference of the church. Nevertheless, it existed. Many, many statements abound among ordinary old Christians, people who did not descend from Jews or from Muslims, to the effect of, look, everybody can be saved in his or her own law. Right? In other words, people are different, and that's the way it is. And I think this was accentuated by the encounter with the Americas. The idea that, well, the Aztecs were perfectly happy, and the Mayas were perfectly happy, the Incas were happy, leading their own lives. And they didn't need Jesus, and they didn't have Jesus, and they had their own, let's say, comprehensible system of social organization. They had nobility, they had, VIPs, they had princesses, and so forth. So this is one approach. It's relativistic. Another approach, which I think is difficult for Jewish memory to swallow, is that of the earnest Christians. People who simply went along to get along. An let's say, undervalued, underestimated segment of the human population, right? How many of us can say, well, I said no, I'm not going to put up with this nonsense. I stood up and immediately had my head chopped, but I'm proud. No. We kind of put up with a lot of crap. Okay, I'm sorry, we do. But we do. Yes. And most people, I think, are more inclined to dodge bullets and to accept reality as it is than otherwise. So I would say that these new Christians were the majority. There were also those professional anti-Jewish types, anti-Jewish Christians. And we have many in the Bay Area. They're not Christians, they're anti-Jewish progressives, yes? The main reason that I'm Jewish is to stick it to the rest of the Jews. That's how I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish because I'm pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas, Okay? I'm sorry for editorializing, but this is one approach. I can tell you that I feel, let's say, chutzpahdik enough to say this, because I know that there was a quasi-professional sort. Pablo de Santa Maria and Jerónimo de Santa Fe of the world, whose job it was, as friars, to stick it to the Jews publicly. To say, yes, I come from Jews, but I've seen the truth, and look at these losers. Yeah, and I'm going to debate them in public, and I'm going to lambast them and tell them what's what, and tell them who's God, and show them that the Messiah already came, that they're lost, and so on and so forth. This is all before 1492, but there is such a class. Yes, it's a meal ticket. Okay, if you were one of these professional anti-Jews, you could count with the sponsorship of great noblemen, and you could count with a very nice stipend, and so forth. There was a way of saying, no, I'm with you guys. I'm the good kind of Jew. I'm not the bad kind of Zionist Jew. I'm the good kind of Jew who says the state of Israel should cease to exist. Excuse me, who says that Jesus, you get my point. And then there were the ultra-informers, people who made it a kind of a career to inform on their fellows, yeah, before the Holy Office. This happened very, very often with people who were caught by the Holy Office after coming back from abroad, where they cavorted with openly professing Jewish people, right?
Was this under torture, or was this like spontaneous?
No, I'm talking about spontaneous. Now, a lot of people did, denounce their fellows under duress. That is given. But it's very interesting. When that happened, you could detect attempts to sidestep the worst denunciations. In other words, I'm going to give you the names of dead people, or people that I know are far away, or people that I hate, and you can pursue them all you want, but I'm not going to give you the really juicy stuff. No, I'm talking about ultra-informers, people who made it kind of a way not only to save their skins, but to, in a sense, to gain an alternative kind of prestige among the inquisitors and their like. Okay? Now, examples. Okay? Here are the words of an earnest Christian converso from Toledo, 1568. This is it's a horrible case. It's a woman who was being interrogated, and she didn't. Listen, one thing about the Inquisition is it never told you what the accusations were. It brought you before the tribunal and said, okay, so go over your conscience and denounce yourself. Say what you have done that is contrary to the faith. And you were supposed to say what? One time I didn't cross myself while entering the church. Okay, what else? Let it be known to you that we have information from witnesses that goes well beyond this. So again, look at your conscience and be thorough. Otherwise, there's hell to pay. And I'm not paraphrasing, but you get the idea. So this poor woman was stuck not knowing who denounced her and what exactly the denunciations were. So she asked, tell me what I have to say. I will tell all that you want. I have done everything that is said about me. Okay? So I don't know, we cannot know, because the Inquisition didn't pursue what you might call a due process, but I can surmise to some degree of certainty that this woman was at least a person who wanted to get along and who was trying to be as good a Christian as she could be. Okay, now here's another case, what the Inquisition might call an anti-Christian. Okay, but this case is a little bit more difficult to read. A man said in Lisbon in 1619, by the way, the Inquisition in Lisbon was founded in 1536 on the Spanish model, quote, and this is written in the third person, as was customary. He came to speak about the law of Moses with his friend, and they both acknowledged to one another that they lived by it and believed in it, saying that it was good and that they expected to be saved in it. Okay? So the first question that comes to my mind is why this particular diction? Why these phrases? There were so many testimonies that were identical that I can tell you this is more than hackneyed. This is a formula. Okay, it doesn't mean that the person didn't do something, but what that something was, we cannot really tell. At any rate, this is a kind of self-denunciation that would signal to the inquisitors, okay, we're in business. All right, let's process this person. Let's requisition his or her property. Off we go. Okay, thank you. Now, there are a lot of comments that I can make about matters of identity, but I just wanted to emphasize the fact that when you look at conversos, you cannot assume either crypto-Judaism or its absence categorically. You have to ask the key historians questions. Sorry. When and where are we talking about? Okay? I apologize. This is my, I don't know. I'm so excited. I lose track of the microphone. Anyway, if we're talking about Spain after the 1530s, have doubts. Yeah? At that point, what we might recognize as secret Judaism was no more than perhaps a few ethnological traces mixed up with a lot of anti-Christianity. For example, one of the things that was quote-unquote proof positive of a Jewish disposition, of Judaizing for the inquisitors, was avoiding pork. All right. All right. How many of you have eaten pork? Okay. That means that you're not Jewish, right? By the same token, the church dictates that you must eat pork to be a Christian, right? No, of course not. People who avoided pork, if they did at all, did so probably because they were habituated to avoiding pork. I avoid pork. Why? Because I want to be conscious that, that my ancestors did it too, so why am I such a big shot that I'm not going to do it? Fine. But there are people who were born into families where pork was avoided. So they acquired a sort of a visceral distaste for pork. It didn't mean that they wanted to be bad Christians. It just meant that they were following in their ancestors' footsteps. Ethnology is not the same as Judaism. Okay. Yes?
Curious, where did most of the Jews go? Did they go to Tunisia and North Africa? When did they
The first wave of exiles or refugees went to Portugal, which is obviously the closest place. Thereafter, some of them went directly to North African ports, Morocco, what is currently Algeria. This makes sense. It was very difficult to escape by boat because you had to have the means, you had to pay a lot of people, you were essentially extorted. And once you arrived, you were penniless or worse. You were hungry. It was very tough. Eventually, the Iberian Jews who escaped went to the heart of the Ottoman Empire, meaning the main cities of Anatolia, so Istanbul, Izmir, and so forth, and also the Greek archipelago and slightly beyond. So the Balkans. That's where you had until the Second World War significant communities of not conversos, not people who were baptized and who then escaped, but Jews who refused to convert. Yeah.
There's also the very interesting part, because that was my ancestry. People moved to the north. Amsterdam was a free city.
Yes, so these, the founders of the Amsterdam community were conversos who saw themselves as returnees to Judaism. That's a very interesting story, and it's part of my research. Okay, sir.
I did genealogy research, and my ancestor, Rabbi Meir Melamed, apparently was the quarter of Ferdinand and Isabella, and I found one of my ancestors was Antonio Olvera of Olvera Street.
Oh.
I did the whole research. My father came from Morocco. This is my mother's
Uh-huh.
side, though.
Yeah.
But the question I had is these last names like Delavet, they made the name so thing, but it could be the Levites. But they changed it to like a Norman name to be distant, but they're really Jewish.
Um,
Right? Like Del Levi. Like I was reading the Levites.
Yeah.
Levit. Became L-E-V-E-T-T,
Yeah.
L-E-V-I-T-E.
So,
which is very
yeah.
interesting. Del Levite. Is that
I,
right?
I suspect that in the early generations, there was a contingent which presented itself as super Christian. Why? Because Jesus and his mother and the apostles were Judeans, or were Israelites. And therefore, why should anybody persecute them? Yeah? This was especially true of famous families, important families that made it big in the church. Yes. However, I would say that among the, let's say, the converso rank and file, the tendency was to adopt names that were davka, super common. Like, I don't wish upon anybody my experience in Portugal, where I was looking for somebody called Vieira. It's the most. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm looking for John Smith." Good luck.
I agree.
But I think what you're referring to I don't know, I can't prove this, but I think it may have been a tendency among certain conversos who wanted to argue, no, you shouldn't persecute us harshly. You need to re-educate the rank and file with a certain tenderness, with Christian love. Yes.
Are there DNA evidence of people? My wife is Dutch.
Yeah.
She has 13% Portuguese,
Whoa.
which
Yeah, it makes sense.
makes sense, and her name is not a typical Dutch name.
What is the
The last name was Toby, which is atypical.
Yeah, so, look, I'm not a DNA expert. I tend to shy away from making assertions about the cultural value of DNA. In some cases like yours, I think, it's easy, relatively easy, relatively straightforward to trace, lines of cultural heritage, because they align with what is known historically. I worry when people say, well, I had in the Bronze Age, I had, some ancestors who were in the Levant. Therefore, I feel Jewish. It's a little bit too much. As I keep saying, you learn culture in a social framework.
It comes back from several.
Yes.
The interest.
Am I out of time? Yeah. Okay. Yes, please.
It's California.
Okay, good. Yeah. I'm sorry, I just get excited. I lose track of time entirely.
So I understand the Portuguese Inquisition totally struggled times. TOBI. Is that true? Because I know we were studying the Spanish Inquisition. What about Portuguese?
So the Spanish Inquisition went from 1478 to 1832. It's a long span. Portuguese Inquisition, 1536 to, I want to say, 1770 something. Now, so did they run parallel at times? Yes. Believe it or not, there are relatively few people, not so much, but when I started my research into this, I found that there were very few people who looked at them side by side. There seems to be an invisible wall between Portugal and Spain, and there's a sort of like a trampoline that Portuguese can jump on and jump straight to France. It seems they're very Francophile. But anyway, the point is that the comparison is very interesting. Structurally, both Inquisitions were run very much alike, but the mentality, you might say that the mental habits of the Spanish Inquisitors were drastically, in some cases, drastically different from those of the Portuguese Inquisitors. The Spanish Inquisitors, it seems, had a very highly developed ethnographic imagination and curiosity. So they really, really drilled into people's affairs. How did you know? What did you do? What did you think? When did this happen? To whom are you related? Et cetera, et cetera. And most importantly, what kind of property have you got? Because you didn't even have to be convicted in order to lose your property. You were imprisoned or whatever, and then your property was taken. So that's the way that the Holy Office ran its business, right? Eventually, it engaged in the sale of offices, but its main budget was drawn from the people it could arrest. So this is very important. It tells you that there's no such thing as a disinterested inquisitor. Okay. Now, the Portuguese inquisitors were, you might say, were abysmally bureaucratic. They really just wanted to get the courses through. So they got a response like the one I read, and they were satisfied. Also, they were much more racially conscious, or proto-racially conscious. On the covers of the inquisitorial processes from Portugal, you have locutions such as so-and-so, John Snow, yeah, who is 1/8 new Christian. And the Spanish inquisitors technically didn't care. So what if you're maybe you're like a Jew because you're crazy? And some of the heroes of crypto-Judaism were actually all Christians, and they declared as much. And people have done research into them, know this for a fact. They had no Jewish ancestry whatsoever. They were people who read mostly they were low-level educators, priests, what have you. They read the Old Testament and they went, wait a minute, it doesn't make any sense. What is this Jesus guy? I don't care. I'm gonna live like a Jew, which means living according to the Torah. Forget about the rabbis. They didn't know about the rabbis. So very often they did things like they circumcised themselves and just crazy stuff like that. Radicals, really. Yes.
I was going to ask if it was mostly about people who had converted to Christianity and then still followed Judaism, which I assume means also like because the children of converts were also considered new Christians, it's just as bad to be practicing Judaism if you're like even if you didn't make the decision to convert, if your parents made the decision to convert to Christianity, you're still seen as betraying Christianity by practicing Judaism.
So here's where different conceptions of otherness and of social, let's say, social cultural violations tend to interpenetrate. Technically, the Holy Office, Portuguese, Spanish, Roman, whatever, Venetian, was in charge of re-educating people in the proper faith and the proper behavior according to the church, right? It didn't really matter where you came from, whether you actually did X or believed X. All that needed to happen for you to be brought before the Holy Office was somebody came to the Holy Office and said, hey, so-and-so is misbehaving. This is, what I'm trying to say is that there was a presumption of guilt, not innocence, yeah? So the fact that somebody says about you, this person is misbehaving, means that you're misbehaving, and what remains is for you to declare it, because your declaration makes it possible to, let's say, to be okay with God. Your body may suffer, your body may have to suffer because of your infraction, but your spirit will ultimately be redeemed. It's a very Christian idea. So ultimately, and here's the other thing. The fact that people came from Jewish ancestors, this was not officially indicative of anything, but informally there was a presumption that if you came from Jews or Muslims, that you had a sort of an inborn predisposition to Judaicize, to hereticize, and even to apostatize, yes? That's why even the Spanish inquisitors, who were, I think, the more pious of the two kinds, yeah, compared to the Portuguese, were very keen to ask people, and this is part of their standard procedure, their protocol, they had to ask them about their ancestry. Are you a new Christian? Are you an old Christian? Did any one of your relatives ever go through an inquisitorial procedure? If so, what was the result? Where were you baptized? To whom are you related? Et cetera, et cetera. And this was meant to establish cause. Yes. No? Did you want to say? Should we close up shop? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your endurance. My God. Yeah. I told you I could keep you awake all night.